Good afternoon, people of the world. I'm Michael Moran.
And I'm Celia Gibson.
And we are the two people that make up Moran Woodworked furniture.
We scribbled a couple of notes to start with, lest we forget to tell you something essential, like we design and build furniture. We design and build our bespoke and limited edition furniture and sculpture, one piece at a time, cutting through joint, chisel in hand, in our Hudson Valley workshop and home in the woods.
You want me to do the?
Yeah.
Yes. Since 2004, which is how long we've been running our own shop, our works range from the smallest end tables to in-home libraries, upholstered sofas to dining tables, kitchens to beds. So wide range of things that we are fortunate to be able to build.
So we work from standing tree all the way to finished furniture. So our vision very much relies on an immersive, hands-on participation throughout the entire considered part of the process. We work exclusively with sustainable wood. We know exactly where every single board we work with came from and where the tree grew.
I'm going to let Celia read the next because she wrote it very beautifully.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We intend that each functional custom work is a composition brought to life by judicious selection and placement of the idiosyncrasies of individual boards. And it's assured longevity by employing time-tested joinery meant to last generations. Ultimately, we hope that our work reflects a sense of timelessness seen through a modern lens.
And that's the end of our totally scripted bit. So thanks for following along with that. Ultimately, what we wanted to do today is have a little bit of a conversation with us, with you, about the notion of sustainability. And sustainability is something that is a very live definition that has changed over time into how we understand it now. And it's we understand more and more how important it is at this point in time. And what we want to talk about principally is what sustainability means to us through the way we do our work, through kind of the three major tenets of our work.
Yeah, I think that says it quite well. So we sort of wanted to use the structure of how we think about our work, the wood, the construction, and the design, and think about sort of how sustainability ultimately is a sort of linchpin to how we approach each one of those things.
And we could talk for a long time about every single one of these. But what we want to do is kind of approach each one separately, even though it's not separate, a little bit, and really hope that you chime in with questions. I think our plan will be to address those kind of in between the sections. So this can be as much of a conversation, and please don't hesitate if you have questions or comments or et cetera. We're going to follow along with those kind of while we're talking and make this as conversational as we possibly can.
Absolutely. And by the way, we're speaking to you from our living room. Generally, because our house is across the street from our workshop, and we live very much sort of away from any town or village. When people work with us, they often, in the pre-COVID age at least, they often come and visit us here in our workshop, in our home. So we hope that this ends up feeling a bit like the kind of conversation that we would have with someone who is maybe commissioning a piece of our work.
Yeah. And part and parcel with that is we have two animals here which may be joining us. We have Sassafras, the 16-year-old Siamese, who may join us from time to time, and directly across from us, out of screen, is Seamus, our 9-year-old retired greyhound, who is happily napping on his sheepskin because he needs a sheepskin. So the first thing we're going to talk about a little bit is materials, is what we work with, where it comes with, how we think about sustainability with materials. It is a more common thing that people talk about in furniture with sustainable materials, with the rise of FSC graded things where there's a forest stewardship council that is overseeing making sure what is being cut is being replanted, etc. But over the years, what we've become more and more engaged in is utilizing only trees that were going to go to waste or that are coming from 100% known sources. And what we mean by 100% known sources is we know where the tree stood, we know why it came down, and exactly whose hands it passed through before ours.
If any.
If any. And in many cases, it passed through nobody's hands before ours. We're at a point now where we oversee all of our milling. So every tree that comes from a neighbor's yard that had to come down, from a storm down, from a whole mixed bag of situations, and from kind of all over the country, depending mostly on the eastern seaboard. It goes to one miller that we work with that's about a half an hour south of us, and then every board comes straight back to us. I or both of us are milling, deciding how every log is being cut, trying to figure out how to most judiciously and efficiently use every bit of that tree.
Let me chime in real quick. I think to clarify some of that, so since moving up here to the Hudson Valley, a huge percentage, particularly of the walnut we use, which is a lot of the work that we make is constructed in walnut. It's coming from a radius of, 10 or 15 miles away from our home. It's coming from one of the first couples we met when we moved up here 6 years ago, almost 7 years ago. Storm came through, brought down a tree, dead standing trees, particularly our ash are a lot of those situations. There's a billion tree, devastating blight that is hitting our ash in this country, and we find using those trees, which have already died and are dead standing, becomes a part of a cyclical process. Mm-hmm. But I think finding for us those stories and being able to connect the tree's specific story to the end user becomes something that's really important to us.
Yeah, and I think that's, well, first to say, Gio, thank you so much for saying that. And it is something that's become super important to us, and also super important in terms of what Celia just started to say, which is our capacity and interest in being able to communicate that with our end user. So that if we're working on a commission piece and we're choosing wood specifically for that project, we're able to say, hey, this is where that wood came from. Sure. These are often pictures of it standing. This is the story behind the tree, so that even when it comes into our hands, there's so many years of a history to it that we want to make sure we're very conscious of and honor, and then to be able to pass that on into furniture, and then through that piece of furniture, let that communicate to our clients.
And ultimately, because we are a two-person shop, we do everything from start to finish. Nothing leaves our hands.
Yes.
And as a small shop, one of the things that it allows us to do is really use the entire tree. Mm-hmm. And when we're able to do that, a single tree can build so many different kinds of things for us. And being able to use trees that already are, a power line is going in and the electrical company is going to take down the tree and there is no option. It gives us the opportunity to sort of unite almost sentimentality, maybe for somebody who's lived with that tree. I don't know. There's a great story. One of our longtime clients, tree had died in his parents' yard. It's the tree that his rope swing was attached to as a kid. And we ended up working with them in order to save the tree, mill it, and turn it into furniture that lives in his home.
Yeah.
And finding those ties is really important. And sometimes, obviously, there's not necessarily a specific sentimental connection, but so much of the wood that we work with is certainly now regional, or Michael's from Kentucky originally. And so we have a lot of sort of family there. And so many of our trees will come from there as well, but always built on relationships with people. Yeah. And we love that about our work.
And one of the challenging things that brings in for us is that we don't order wood for projects. Because when we have these opportunities to save trees and mill, and when these come in, we take them and store them. So often what we do with, actually what we do with all of our pieces, but specifically commission pieces, say, hey, we're going to walk through the wood storage room. We've got thousands of board feet of a number of different species from all kinds of places that we've held on to. And we've sawn many of them in ways that they're extremely flexible for how we want to use them. They're conducive to book matching, which is a process we may talk a little bit about, but it means that because we're overseeing that, we really can do so many different and interesting things with the wood. But I think before we move on from the materials,
Sure.
Celia made a note here. One of the really important things we want to say too is that while we work with wood and we love it and it's the basis of us, we also would prefer to see trees continue to grow.
Absolutely.
And understand there's a balance there of, if it doesn't have to come down, don't take it down. For us, there's so much already being taken down with new construction, with maintenance, with what's dying, with storms, etc., that we don't need to take down new healthy trees. Or we've got old trees that are just dead or starting to go downhill, and they can be preserved and used for generations to come through a piece of furniture.
You know, in other communities, they'll call it urban salvage, which when we lived in Charleston, South Carolina, which is where our company started, that was very much the case. You know, you are in a urban, suburban environment, and it feels like as trees are coming down, you're doing your best to rescue them. I think here there's that sort of urban salvage approach is sort of country salvage, rather than becoming firewood.
Rural salvage.
Yeah, rural salvage. It's rather than becoming firewood, it sort of has the opportunity for another life in this way.
I think one of the other things before we move on past the materials is that a lot of times there is a notion attached to, if something's salvage, it is imperfect, there is something wrong with it, or it is been processed in a certain type of way. But one of the blessings that we have is that really everything we're working with, it is in sometimes a higher quality of wood because we're able to oversee every bit of it, saw it the way we want, etc. And in many cases, so many of the things that are being taken down out of our control, they are healthy, happy trees that yield really tons of usable and beautiful wood out of them. Let me address, we had a question. I was just going to call for questions on anything related to materials before we moved on to the next and very much integrated part of it. Hey, Aaron, are there specific species of trees you wouldn't be interested in that don't lend themselves to furniture or other projects? That's a good question. So we're a little bit of an oddity in that I think I counted the other day, we might have 15 different species of wood in the shop, some in small quantities, some in large. Celia mentioned before, a lot of walnut. We do a lot of work in walnut for a number of reasons.
We love it.
We love it. And there's another hour of talking about walnut. Yeah. So there are absolutely some species of trees that are not as conducive to furniture making. Part of it has to do with the stability of them. The way the grain holds, it has to do with the workability of them. Some of them take finish as well, some of them don't, etc. So we do often get calls from kind of all over still at this point saying, hey, I've got a blank coming down. Do you want to look at it? Or, hey, I've got tree service came and they took a bunch of this down, or they're going to come and take some of this down. It's this species. Is it something you're interested in? Or does it have to be a certain size? Is another really important, let me finish on that.
Yeah.
Thing is saying, hey, if you've got a 6-inch diameter tree coming down, it's not, by the time we mill it, try and do anything with it, we're talking about very little, if any, usable lumber from it. So we do have to look out for a certain size. That means, hey, it makes sense for us to go through the whole process. There's enough usable material out of this that it energy and economically makes sense to do.
Yeah, it's still a cost equation. I was just simply going to say, can you give a specific species example of one that would be really challenging for us to work with?
Well, given that we lived in Charleston, South Carolina, palm trees are not something we.
Well, they're not actually
from.
Trees.
Well,
so
that's a bit
different. That's a bit like cheating.
There are live oak trees, which is something we saw a lot in the South. There are so many different kind of subspecies of oak. Some of them are more conducive to work with than others.
Some of them are like rubber bands. You try to cut into them, and they just
They do what they want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And honestly, all wood does that. It all does what it wants. If a tree grew with a slight twist to it, that'll be expressed even once you cut it into boards. So part of our job is making sure, and we'll talk about this a little bit in a second, but making sure that we pick the right board for the right application. So it's a bit of a.
And I think that's a good segue into talking about construction, which is, the second of our kind of
principal tenets.
Our triangle of tenets that are all connected. So one of the ways we think about sustainability with construction as well, going back to the kind of base of the sustainability, is how a piece is built really has a huge amount of effect on the longevity of that piece, the type of joints you use, what the way you are using the wood, whether it's a veneer or a solid wood construction. And, one other notion of sustainability is simply saying, hey, we don't need to rebuild this over and over. We're not building something that's going to break down in 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, but we're building something that hopefully, if reasonably cared for, come. So there's no need to build another something and use more material, etc.
Fewer, better pieces.
Yeah,
that's what we like the idea
of. We did bring a couple of little joint testers that are kind of fun to share from the shop, of just a notion of how some things get put together.
Let me interject as well. Yeah. Some people ask this question of us, or quite often ask this question of us. Michael is at team. He's been doing this for a really long time. He has a level of expertise that I'm better suited to tell you about his expertise because I can.
Because he doesn't like to talk about it.
Yes. Yeah. But we design all the work together, and he built it in the workshop across the street, all of it, every single piece, by hand. Hi, Brad.
Hey, Brad.
Thanks for joining us. But talk about the joints.
Yeah. So it's
Michael's
just
geeky
just
spot.
to share, one of the most sustainable ways and strongest ways to build furniture is with wood on wood joints, not using screws, not using something else, and considering joints that allow wood to do what it's going to do anyway. It's going to expand and contract a little bit. Even after cut and dried, it is a living thing.
Kind of like your floors. You know, sometimes you get if you live in an old house, you'll get larger gap spaces at certain times of year, and then it kind of swells during the summer again.
And I'm sure everybody that lives in the Northeast is very familiar with, come wintertime, especially if you have any number of heating sources, everything in your house kind of does this, and then springtime comes and it relaxes a little bit.
You get creaks.
We try and account for that in terms of how we're building things. So this, if we can show this is just a little joint put together. You can see where two pieces come together here. It's mortised out and it slips over, and then there's a little pin that fits in there that's a wood pin. So it means there's really no way this is going to go anywhere in any direction. So it's locked in place really permanently. The wood would have to break, which would take a serious mallet for that to be the case. But it also still allows the flexibility of the wood. Everybody knows the dovetail. This is a kind of pain in the butt angled dovetail that we use for a specific project. This was the tester joint.
Around this way.
So it
you can see the end
slides in there and locks in super tight. So again, it can't move side to side. And once it's locked with a tiny bit of glue, it doesn't go anywhere. But it does allow both bits of the wood to expand and contract. And this is just a little part of a mortise. This would be the side of a cabinet or something, and where it fits into the leg. So that little bit that's trimmed out would be completely invisible. But it shows you the continuation of that piece that adds all the structure. And I don't know if it's worth showing chisels or not.
We brought our chisels up mostly because they're handmade by a Japanese artisan, and it kind of goes back to the idea of having one thing that's the right thing and using it and caring for it for for a lifetime. In our case, these will last Michael his entire working career.
And they will be. There's a nice little angle there. But the notion that what we're working with. Why don't you
hold up one rather than the whole box? He made the box for the chisels, and it's kind of a.
This is the traditional shape of chisels. I believe it's called a fishtail or a dovetail chisel. And these
show a close up so they can see how beautiful. Flip it around the other way as well.
It's got a hollow on the back and needs a little polish at this point. But these were, as Celia said, handmade by actually a 5th generation blacksmith in Japan.
Whose family used to make samurai swords. Yeah. In fact, you see a lot of that with knives, in fact, as well. But chisels are another extension of that.
So to move on.
Well, I was going to answer a question. So there are 2.
Hey. Chad, we showed the chisels. Excellent. Thank you. Mitch, joined us so beautiful. Loved to know this weather chiseling. Thank you. Thank you. It is, as we said, every aspect of this, we could go down a hour-long rabbit hole because I love the intricacy of joinery and thinking about it, how to execute it, how it really works, and etc.
And Brad, to answer your question, let's speak for just a second about the chart effect. It is absolutely something that we do. We've done huge pieces and small pieces. Michael teasingly once upon a time called it shupinibon.
Shupinibon.
Thank you. It is based on a Japanese technique. We do it traditionally, so rather than using a blowtorch, which uses gasoline and feels like it's sort of the antithesis of what we're looking for in terms of process, we use a chimney. So we generally take pine rather than the Japanese would have used a local cedar because that's what
was abundant.
And also it was generally used for construction. So it would have been used for siding of really beautiful buildings. The Japanese, because of the earthquake-prone environment, were very conscious about fires. So things like termites and again, fire sort of retention, those things sort of become really important in why they would have been charring this wood in the first place. Mm-hmm. So obviously, having lived in Charleston for a long time, we used pine because it's incredibly prevalent there. People were taking it down left, right, and center, which we found upsetting.
I might actually, while Celia's talking to you, we have one of the charred side tables.
How is
our little guys
light on that?
Not great. There we go. Hey, you can see it. Yeah. Sorry, this is the impromptu move that Brad was asking about.
Let me plug that back in.
Yeah, no, we got it. So yeah, that's in short. We could talk a whole lot about that as well. I do quickly on the construction because I also want to get back. Julie had asked what the favorite piece we make is, and that's one we're going to marinate on for just a second because I
already know the answer to that.
Well, that's good.
For me.
Good. I don't know that I have one. On the construction side, in terms of sustainability, also we work with only solid wood. We do not veneer anything, etc. So one of the big pluses of that is every piece we make, it can get dinged up, scratched, beaten, the finish can wear off, and all of it can be fixed, and it can be a brand new piece in no time. And that is another one of those blessings of solid wood is that piece then continue to live and live and live and be cared for and not cared for and brought back to life and etc. Yeah, I think that's the major.
So I think, Julie, in order to answer your question, it actually is kind of an interesting segue into design, which is kind of the last of those three tenets. So my answer are dining tables, and it's for a couple of reasons. You know, I feel like dining room tables are often a location where we gather with friends, with family. Obviously, during the COVID age, that can be particularly painful and challenging. But in my experience for us, our greatest challenges have happened around the dining room table. You sit and you discuss the things that you wish you didn't have to face and the things that are joyful to face. Maybe your kids are doing their homework at the dining room table. Maybe it's the place once a year where your family gathers for a festive occasion. I don't know. I feel like life happens there. I used to make forts under our dining room table. And part of the reason why I say it's a great segue And you might actually, Chad had mentioned that if you click below the sort of image of us, you can see a link to one of our dining room tables, which is listed for sale presently. But it's a good example of a technique, book matching, which is kind of principal to what we do aesthetically. It's from our perspective, we're sort of as much curating wood boards that are already beautiful. The grain already has so much to say. It's kind of about how do we frame it simply, cleanly, not sparely, but aesthetically a bit more. Simple, clean lines.
Context too.
Yeah, in order to be able to sort of set it off as almost like an art panel.
We also have this, I don't know that it classifies as saying, but ultimately we're working with something that's already fantastic and beautiful, and our job is to not screw it up.
Yeah, we say that a lot.
Present it in a certain form without screwing it up. So I think, do you want to grab that mirror just as an example of?
Yeah, we'll see if we can.
I don't know how well this will translate. These are a couple of mirrors we have on. Will help.
We'll sort of.
So there's actually a seam dead center.
No, it's not really.
Yeah, it's not going to show very well.
Good job.
The basic notion of
look at it on the
there's a better picture with both the dining table and the mirrors, and really most everything's on there.
Most of our book matches are really big as well, so we tried to bring one up.
We brought it. We have a couple pieces of lumber leaning against the wall here that we're going to try and show, and that wasn't going to translate too well. So the basic of book matching is you take one piece of lumber and you cut it through the middle and open it up. So what you end up with is a line of symmetry through the middle, and then two mirror images. And those mirror images completely change the aesthetic.
It's like a Rorschach test, like ink blot test. It feels like all of a sudden you see things in the wood that faces. And in fact, we have a series of sculptures called apparitions, and it's sort of literally an unveiling of something that was already present in the wood, documentation of how that tree grew every single day for its lifetime.
Yeah.
And we're just exposing that.
Yeah, I think also Faith, thanks so much. I think what you were getting at too is one of the things that we love about the book matching or can apply to is that everybody sees different things in it.
Yeah.
That's what we love is when we deliver a dining table and there's two big book match pieces or a pair of them, or we're doing a cabinet where the whole face of it is all book matched. And inevitably we bring it in and whomever we're bringing it to says, oh, wow, I see this in it. Or I see that in it. The other day,
it was an owl. There was just absolutely two owl eyes looking at us from the side of the cabinet. Yeah. Like, unequivocally an owl.
And a dachshund.
Yeah, a dachshund. There was a dining table.
There was a dachshund and a dining table as well.
Really quickly, Jess, thank you for your comment about the mirrors. We do have a couple that are available for sale. Every book match is different. And if you're interested in actually seeing the specific book matches, if you get in touch with us, then we can snap a couple of pictures if one speaks to you or resonates with you particularly.
Yeah. So to briefly get back to the sustainability as it applies to design, one of the other big things that Celia was touching on is our design aesthetic. We're influenced by all kinds of things, but ultimately our goal is to be able to create pieces that make sense and pass through a modern lens now, but also can exist harmoniously with all kinds of different other pieces so that they can work in homes that maybe you've got pieces from 4 different eras and say, hey, our dining table, for example, our dining table at our house is pretty mid-century, kind of splayed 4 legs, very simple.
Book match top.
And we've got 6 chairs around it that are probably early 1900s, late 1800s chairs that are much more antique.
English with needlepoint
cushions.
They sit on a 1930s Chinese, China nickel rug. And we have a couple of vintage pieces of furniture in the room as well. But
I think the goal for us is to create something that looks and works now, but also is going to look and work in the future and with whatever else you have. So it's not so stylized that it doesn't work with other things, but it's also not so pared back that it doesn't have a design personality as well.
Let's answer Wendy's question, and I know that we're sort of running short on time, and there's just one last thing that we wanted to mention before we wrapped up.
Wendy asked, what defining characteristics or role do you each have that aids the process of making these pieces? Well, we both, I mean, I think Celia had said before, we design everything together.
It's a collaboration.
Yeah.
I think.
It's absolutely collaboration. When I was 19, I started apprenticing and working in a furniture shop. And then when I was 22, opened my own shop. And 5 years later, Celia joined it. And now we're 10 years down the line.
Yeah.
So there's a side of me that, milling, looking at the boards, the hands-on, the joinery, the
how
construction of it is probably one of my stronger suits and what I really focus on.
And I think my favorite part is probably, or the thing that I feel like I impact the most, is part of the wood selection. For me, picking out book matches, and I spend a lot of time communicating with our clients. So I'm writing numerous emails throughout the process, sharing photos, documenting the process, talking them through, sort of turning an illegible board into what something will look like. 90% of our work is commission work is bespoke work, as opposed to the pieces that you see for sale here, which are more limited edition pieces or perhaps a one-off piece that we've built. But to me, I feel like that communication is principal to how our business functions. I mean, ultimately it's relationship building, it's communication between the two of us, and it's communication with the people who are trusting us to realize something that literally there's no point of reference for when you start. And I think that can be an intimidating leap to make.
Yeah, I think in terms of doing commission work, that is, Celia is also being humble, in her background is very much in literature and arts writing. And so the ability to communicate some of these thoughts, ideas, if you look at our website and all of our writings, she's written all of that. And that's, a critical part, because obviously no matter what you do, if you can't communicate it accurately, and as Celia had said with commission work, is that people trust us, and we rely on that trust, and we also want to make sure that is a trust that goes both ways, and that it's a very comfortable process. And in terms of photos while pieces are going on, or even finished one-off pieces that we have, is really communicating every aspect of that, even though we do have pictures of it, about how it works and looks and what goes behind it, is really central to us, because it's part of what we love about the work, is that we get to do that, and we get to build those relationships with people through these pieces. And they're pieces that we're super invested in. As individuals, we spend a lot of time, working with the wood from standing tree all the way through. I once counted the number of times each board passed through my hands.
Or
every single board.
I mean, wood is air drying for 6 months before it even goes
6 months to a year to 2 years to our kiln.
And then ultimately we start working with it. So we're already talking about sort of a year, really at the minimum, that part of the process. It's very much a longer process for us. I know that I was just going to say, can I say one thing real quick, Chad, just to sort of, wonderful. So I had written kind of just a sort of touchstone wrap up moment, about sustainability. Ultimately, we hope that your individual approach to sustainability can evolve from a set of principles. And the ones that we would suggest look something like this. Select the best quality that you can afford, whether it's antique, vintage, box store, or from an independent maker. Purchase from people who themselves represent and uphold values that are important to you. Makers that represent a wide spectrum of lived experience through race, gender identity, ability, sexual orientation, immigrant experience. Buy things that you love and can commit to. And ultimately, choose goods that can be mended. They will last longer and stand by you. And I feel like those principles to us,
Those are kind of the tenets of...
it doesn't have to be buying from us or even anyone in the field and supply community, though we all appreciate that. But I think thinking about those things that can be sustainability for you.
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much for being here and whinnying along with us
Absolutely.
for the last little while. And we hope to be in touch.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.